Thank you, friend. Shabbat Shalom. It's great to be back here once again. In fact, it's always great to see you all. And yes, I do say that every week that I love seeing you, even though you can see me and I actually can't see you. But it certainly does feel like I can. I love welcoming all our old friends, and I know this week we are welcoming some new ones. So welcome, everybody. And welcome back, Steve, and happy birthday to you. Be well, Bob. Be safe, Ellen and Bruce. Have a great trip, Noah. And feel free to zen out, Natasha. You certainly deserve it. Took an untrodden path once, where the swift don't win the race. Goes to the worthy, who can divide the word of truth. Friends, what is true anymore? We will see this issue at work in this parsha from thousands of years ago. And it hints at three crucial issues, all with truth at the forefront. How we view zeal in this bipolar world of ours. The rights of women, which in the 21st century hasn't necessarily progressed that much since this parsha was written. And the selection of candidate and process of handing over leadership. These three things are all highly emotionally charged issues. And emotion can be a two-edged sword. We strive to feel with intensity because that gives us the fullest taste of life. And we want everyone to have a lust or zeal for life. Live life, feel life. And we think that's good. And it is good. We need to feel all our feelings. We suppress far too many of them. And so many people don't really know what their feelings are, or have limited themselves to a scant half dozen. Love, joy, hate, anger, fear, etc. But remember, nobody's right if everybody's wrong. You know, friends, last week I drove down to Niagara, listening to Broadway as I am wont to do, finding myself with a smile on my face and thinking how nice it was to just sit and smile for a while. I was going to visit some friends along the Niagara River, and I sat out on their patio one afternoon, and I watched as a couple of birds started building a nest against the wall of the house in an alcove area. And they took turns bringing straw and mud. And watching them work, I thought of the Hebrew slaves in Egypt building from straw and mud. And I watched as the birds took turns adding to the structure, sharing the work, the responsibility, the effort. All with amazing cooperation. And I thought that that's how communities used to pull together, but they don't seem to the same way as much. Friends, everything in life is energy. And we know that energy can't be destroyed. It is simply transformed. Straw and mud are just two of the forms energy takes, just as you and I are forms of energy. And I was reminded of how we're all the same root energy, connected to everything else, not just everybody else. And sometimes we're doing forced labor and sometimes labors of love. But the building blocks are the same. So whether you are forced or feel forced to do things, or whether you're doing what you really want to do the best you can. It's your imprint of energy in the world. And if I can borrow from Bruce's song, it's part of your carbon footprint. So always try your best and make the world a little better than how you found it. And as I watched the nest take form in the alcove, I realized that an alcove played a key role in this week's parsha. Pinchas, and Pinchas's perpetual reward. Now, Pinchas was the son of Eleazar, who we saw last week, which of course makes him the grandson of Aaron. And this parsha opens with God telling Moses that Pinchas turned back God's fury so that God didn't finish off everyone, as we've seen he often threatened. In this episode, he only killed 24,000 people. So let's digress for a minute and see what Pinchas did. At the very end of last week's parsha, in Numbers 25:7, we are told an Israelite man and Midianite woman were found within the confines of the entrance of the tabernacle. Sacred space. And we've seen that sacred space is different. And Pinchas picked up a spear and ran them through with it, killing them. No trial, friends. Ethical crimes would demand trials and motives. Ritual crimes demanded action. And the concept of ritual and its meaning is something so far removed from our society today. And this was a crime of the ritual nature. And we see Pinchas rewarded for acting with zeal. We've talked a lot about how words used convey much and are still the subject of much speculation and conjecture. This zealous action is a perfect example. Friends, we've all seen the insanity taking place in Israel now. 3 beautiful youths kidnapped and killed. An Arab boy burnt alive. Retributive actions escalating. Rockets flying again. Is any of this so different from Pinchas' zeal? Today we condemn it. Biblically, he was rewarded and praised for acting for God's jealousy. In looking at this parsha, the great Rabbi Rav Kook talked about the attributes of zeal and concluded that zeal must be carefully refined to ensure that it is truly for the sake of heaven. We have to be certain that none of our human failings are influential in any way, and that it is purely a zeal for God. And the conclusion was that Pinchas' zeal was from his burning love for God, and therefore it was okay. I'd love to know how we, as humans, with human failings and human egos and human predispositions and projections, can determine that. I don't know. And if any of you have an answer, I'd love to hear it and share it. Pinchas acted immediately. He did not wait. But this is not how we have come to be. We deliberate and examine. And if anything, we often wait too long before acting. And do we not tend to condemn those who do act without thinking on the basis of fundamental zealotry? Do we not question anyone who says they were simply following orders, whether God's, superior officers, or anyone else's? So how did words and projections and interpretations come to play such a crucial role in this parsha and our belief system? Words, friends, justifications. And these stem from a word that occurs in this parsha and in this parsha alone. And the word is kuba. Now we believe the word kuba, which as I said is only mentioned in this one text, was linked to the Arabic kubeh, which is a small tent of red leather used for either cultic or conjugal purposes. And our word alcove comes from the Arabic al-kubeh, and that is where Pinchas, with zeal, killed the 2 named individuals. You see, friends, the tabernacle was also of red leather. And the story is Pinchas killed these 2 because they violated the tabernacle, the sanctum sanctorum. But this may be a stretch because the tabernacle is never referred to as anything other than the Mishkan. But we have one of those fabulous biblical Hebrew puns which no one else could possibly understand and which no translation even tries to convey, but which may be the source of our story. We have the kubah, red leather tent used for conjugal purposes. The kubah, a possible name for the red leather adorned tabernacle, and kebah, which means belly, and in this case points to the woman's sexual organs. And so the alcove where the murder took place puns on the word belly where the woman was stabbed. And this would have great meaning to the biblical Hebrew audience. And friends, these were not regular people. We are told their names and lineage for a reason. They were a Simeonite prince and Midianite princess. No one is immune from punishment for violating sacred space. You got adulterers in churches and pornography in the schools. You got gangsters in power and lawbreakers making rules. When you going to wake up? When you going to wake up? When you going to wake up and strengthen the things that remain? Their crime was not in having been found having sex. It was being in forbidden space. And so this was ritual crime. The tabernacle was restricted space, and it was restricted to Levites only. Many commentators have been troubled by the zeal with which Pinchas acted, as a result of which we are told he stopped the plague which had begun. And he found extreme favor in the eyes of God, was accorded a covenant of eternal priesthood, and he was granted Briti Shalom, my covenant of friendship. But friends, is this not the same zeal we often see in today's fundamentalist mentalities, and we don't understand it, and we don't agree with it? This is a very disturbing story. And I'm surprised that when the Torah was divided into its current parshas, this didn't mark the beginning of what's come to be called Pinchas. Instead, the official beginning is the reward and the stopping of the plague that was never mentioned before. And it is the covenant of priesthood and the other adornments given to him. And then a very strange thing takes place. God orders Moses to attack the Midianites. We had this set up with the fact it was a Midianite princess. And this too may be a later political entry. Remember, friends, Moses' first wife, Zipporah, was a Midianite. And her father, Jethro, who was one of the few non-Hebrews to have a parsha named for him, was a Midianite chieftain. He was the one who came up with the system of judges to help Moses. They were never adversarial people, and now they are an enemy. We have certainly already lost the thread of truth. And a new census is ordered, and God says, from 20 years old and up, as the Lord commanded Moses and the children of Israel who had gone out from the land of Egypt. But friends, none of the children who left Egypt are actually still alive. Is this also just a reinsertion of an older section? We don't know. We never will. But we accept that it is not. And friends, when the tally is complete, there are 601,730 people, an amazingly close number to the first census, the legendary and formulaic tally of 600,000, the number of people who witnessed the Epiphany. And we now are actually given the purpose. The census provided information for military prescription, and more importantly, the land is to be distributed according to this new census. And friends, then the most amazing thing takes place in Numbers 27:1. And the daughters of Zelophehad came forward, and they stood in front of Moses and in front of Eleazar the priest, saying, we are about to see the biblical view of women's rights. Man's ego is inflated. His laws are outdated. They don't apply no more. You can't rely no more to be standing around waiting. And there's a slow train coming up around the bend. Friends, this is the start of the slow train of women's rights. They ask about their share in the land grant since their father died and he left no sons. And they make the argument they should not be slighted simply because their father had died. The land should not go to his brothers, but to them. And friends, God tells Moses that the women spoke right, and they will get their father's legacy, and a full outline of the rights of inheritance is laid out. Unfortunately, however, the women made the wrong case. It became a mixed message. They didn't argue for their rights or for women's rights at all. If they had, perhaps the history of equality would have been different. They argued on the basis of their right as replacements, since there were no sons, and God ruled accordingly. Had there been but one son and 10 daughters, they'd have received nothing. Nonetheless, this was a significant step for women's rights, a start towards equality. In an era when women were often just chattel, and perhaps it even was the dawning of a revolution, given the position women were in during that era and in the millennia that followed. The issue that arose was the issue that arises in the law of the Jubilee. Land is unalienable. The property in the family's name must stay in the family forever. And the laws of inheritance become increasingly complex. As the great John Lennon band song of 1972 said, "Woman is the nigger of the world. Yes, she is. If you don't believe me, take a look to the one you're with. Woman is the slave of slaves. Yes, she is. If you believe me, you better scream about it." Have things really changed since that song was written? Unfortunately, friends, it's a process, one involving social transformation, and that takes time. The Torah does take definitive steps to establish women's rights, and we can praise the Bible for how far it went, or we can criticize it for not having gone farther. It's a choice. But instead of debating that, let us work to move all individual rights forward. A few weeks ago, we talked about bookends in Numbers. The bookends of mysticism with the red heifer and the bronze snake. The bookends of death with the deaths of Miriam and Aaron. The bookends of Numbers itself. Bookends with a census at the beginning and a census at the end. And of course, the most interesting bookend of all, the life of Moses. You see, friends, the last direct conversation we see between God and Moses is also a bookend. This conversation is about the people needing a leader. The conversations between them began with the burning bush when God says, I've seen the degradation of my people. God's concern was for the people. And now Moses expresses his concern for the people when he asks God to appoint a new leader for the people so they won't be like sheep that don't have a shepherd. And of course, at the first discussion, Moses stood before God as a shepherd. And God tells him to take Joshua, son of Nun, a man with spirit in him, and lay your hand on him. And like the progression of life itself, Moses, the man drawn from water, from where all life originates, will hand the reins over to Joshua, the son of Nun, which means fish, the life that the water brings. The circle is complete. God told Moses to lay his hand. But Moses lays both hands as if to provide visible support for the choice. He fulfilled the divine commandment with one hand, while the other was his own affirmation so that everyone would know Joshua had Moses' support. The successor of a great leader can be in a very vulnerable position. Friends, blessings have always been by laying on of hands. Just think back to all the patriarchal blessings and how important the touching aspect as a direct transmission of the energy was. And this process, which Moses undertakes, is still to this day the mechanism for the transmission of rabbinic authority. And it's known as smicha, or ordination. And I still remember how privileged, honored, and blessed I felt to follow in the same illustrious footsteps. Unfortunately, friends, I don't know if we'll ever know what the Pinchas story really arose from. Was it a conjugal tent, or was it the tabernacle? And I don't know if we'll ever resolve this question of zeal. Is anyone right when they act on impulse? I don't know how long it will take for not just women to attain equality, but for everyone. And while this parsha brought more questions than answers to me, I do know the feeling of following in a tradition that dates back to Moses and that will continue perhaps for eternity. And that is magical. In 1970, there was a fantastic band up in Stratford, Ontario, where the Shakespearean Festival is held every year. And they released a song called Truth and Fantasy. Truth and fantasy, truth and fantasy, truth and fantasy live together. Truth and fantasy, truth and fantasy, truth and fantasy will live forever. Have an awesome week, my friends, and we'll see you soon. Don't forget we have our special on grief coming up and our special on how to make a great personal Shabbat. Blessings to you all. Have a great one. I will see you soon. Be well. Shabbat Shalom.